தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளையின் சார்பாக நடக்கும் இந்த சொற்பொழிவுக்கு நீங்க வந்ததுக்கெல்லாம் எங்களுடைய நன்றி. இந்த தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளைங்கிறது கிட்டத்தட்ட 3 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால நாங்கெல்லாம் சேர்ந்து ஒரு 10 பேர் இந்த மாதிரியாக ஒரு ரொம்ப இன்ஃபார்மலாக தமிழ்நாட்டு இந்திய பாரம்பரியத்தை பற்றி பரவலாக எடுத்து உரைக்கணுங்கிறதுக்காக நாங்கள் ஆரம்பிச்சது. இது 3 வருஷம் தாக்கு பிடிச்சதுங்கிறது ஒரு பெரிய விஷயம். ஆனா எங்களுக்கு என்ன தோணுது, இது பர்மனன்ட் ஸ்ட்ரக்சர் ஆயிடும் எங்களுக்கு தோணுது. நிச்சயமா இதுவரையிலும் நம்மளுடைய பாரம்பரியத்தினுடைய வெவ்வேறு அம்சங்களை பற்றியான ஆர்வலர்கள், ஆராய்ச்சியாளர்கள் மாத்திரமில்ல, ஆராய்ச்சியாளர்கள் இருந்திருக்காங்க. ஆர்வலர்களும் நிறைய பேரு இந்த சொற்பொழிவுகள் இங்க கொடுத்திருக்காங்க. இதுல ரொம்ப முக்கியமான எங்களுக்கு ரொம்ப வேண்டியது என்னன்னா, ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைமர்ஸ் நிறைய பேருக்கு நிறைய படிச்சிருக்காங்க. ஓரளவுக்கு அதை பற்றியான ஒரு பரிச்சயம் கூட இருக்கும். ஆனா அவங்க ஒரு சொற்பொழிவு நடத்தணும்னா அதற்காக கொஞ்சம் நிறைய படிக்க வேண்டியதா இருக்கும். அது மேலேயே அதனாலேயே அவங்களுக்கு இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் அதுல ஆர்வமும் ஜாஸ்தியாகும். நம்ம சிவா ஒரு எக்ஸாம்பிள். நான் ஒரு தடவை அவர் ஏதோ நாணயங்கள்லாம் பற்றி பேசுறாங்க. நாணயமா இருக்கிறவர் தான். நாணயத்தை பற்றி கொஞ்சம் ஏதோ பேசிட்டு இருந்தாரு. அப்ப நான் சொன்னேன், நீங்க நியூமிஸ்மேட்டிக்ஸை பத்தி ஒரு லெக்சர் கொடுக்கல. ஆனா இதெல்லாம் பண்ண முடியாது, அதெல்லாம் கிடையாது, இந்த மாதம் நீங்க கொடுக்க போறீங்கன்னு. நோ, ஹி இஸ் எ வெரி ஆர்டன்ட் நியூமிஸ்மேட்டிக். என்னென்னமோ பண்ணி நீங்க எல்லாம் போய் பார்த்தது. இது மாதிரி முக்கியமான நிறைய பேர் நம்ம பேருக்குலாம் நம்மள சொற்பொழிவு கூப்பிட மாட்டாங்க. நம்ம ஆர்வம் இருந்தோம்னா யூ ஆர் வெல்கம் ஹியர். பட் யூ ஆர் பண்ணி சம்பளம் என்ன ஒருத்தர ஒரு டாக் கொடுக்கறது இல்லைன்னா யூ ஆர் புட்டிங் தட் எஃபர்ட். ரெண்டாவது மோரலஸ் கொஞ்சம் இன்ஃபார்மல் அட்மாஸ்பியர். கூடிய மட்டும் நாங்க 1 மணி நேரத்தில் பேசி முடிங்க, 1.5 மணி நேரத்தில் பேசி முடிங்கன்னு சொல்றது கிடையாது. அதனாலேயே இங்க கொஞ்சம் கம்ஃபர்டபுளா எல்லாரும் பேசுறாங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். அதனால நாங்க இந்த சொற்பொழிவுல ஒவ்வொரு மாதமும் முதல் சனிக்கிழமை 5:30 மணிக்கு இதே இடத்துல நடக்கும். நீங்க உங்களுடைய நண்பர்களுக்கும் சொல்லுங்க, நீங்க அவங்களையும் கூட்டிட்டு வாங்க. நிறைய எங்களுடைய இதுகள்லாம் ரெகுலர்ஸ் தான் நீங்க நிறைய இருக்காங்க. இதே தவிர இன்னொரு விஷயத்த உங்களுக்கு முன் வச்சுட்டு அடுத்த ப்ரோக்ராமுக்கு போலாம். டிசம்பர் மாதங்கிறது நமக்கு ஒரு சங்கீத சீசன். வீதிக்கு வீதி தமிழ்நாட்டுக்கு சென்னையில வீதிக்கு வீதி கச்சேரி நடக்கிறது. 3000 கச்சேரி ஒரு மாசத்துக்குள்ள நடக்கிறதுன்னா உலகத்துல எங்கேயுமே கிடையாது. அதே சமயத்துல இந்திய பாரம்பரியம், தமிழ் பாரம்பரியம்ங்கிறது சங்கீதமும் நடனம் மாத்திரம் இல்ல, அதர் ஆஸ்பெக்ட்ஸ்ங்கிறதுக்காக இந்த வருஷத்துல இருந்து இந்த தமிழ் பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளைங்கிறது ஒரு புது சீரிஸ் ஒன்று ஆரம்பிக்கிறேன். சங்கீதத்தையும் நடனத்தையும் தவிர இருக்கக்கூடிய சிற்பம், சித்திரங்கள், கோவில் கட்டட கலைகள், போக்கு, இதெல்லாம் காமிக்கிற மாதிரி இதெல்லாத்தையும் ப்ரொஜெக்ட் பண்ற மாதிரி 5 நாட்கள் டிசம்பர் மாதம் 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 நம்ம பாரம்பரிய அறக்கட்டளை சார்பாக பாரம்பரிய கச்சேரிகள் நடத்த போறது. எல்லாரும் நீங்க வரணும். இந்த வருஷம் ஜெயமோகன் ஒரு ப்ரோக்ராம் தரார். உடவாரி பாலசுப்ரமணியம் அவர் கங்கை கொண்ட சோழபுரத்தை பற்றி பேச போறார். டாக்டர் பாலுசாமி கிறிஸ்டியன் காலேஜ் ப்ரொஃபசர், அவர் அர்ஜுனன் தபஸை பத்தி எக்ஸ்பிளைன் பண்ண போறார். உமாபதி ஆச்சாரியான்னு ஒரு ட்ரெடிஷனல் விஸ்வகர்மா, அவர் துர்கா ஐக்கியம் பத்தி பேச போறாங்க. ஸ்வர்ணமல்லியா ஒரு ப்ரொடக்ஷன் ஆஃப் பகவத யுகம் மத விலாச பிரகசனம் டிசைன் பண்ணாங்க. இதை ஒரு ஸ்ட்ரக்சர் அங்க பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம். ஸோ யூ ஆர் ஆல் வெல்கம் ஃபார் தி இன்ஃபார்ம் எவ்ரிபடி. தேங்க்யூ.
Thank you all for being here. Today's lecture will be on the river Sarasvati. The question that we posed is, this Sarasvati river really exists? If so, where? And Michel Danino will trace the river, but not just the river. He will go on to also describe the civilization that came up there, what we normally know or read in our school books as Indus Valley civilization. And Mr. Danino will give us the complete picture of what we pride ourselves in, the great history of India as the earliest civilization. So a brief note about Mr. Danino. He came to India about nearly 3 decades back, more than that. He lives in Coimbatore, near Coimbatore, has great regard for Indian culture, and we have a lot to learn from him in this regard. He has written a few books, and this particular work, in fact, has been published by Penguin. The books are available here for those of you who want to buy this. This book is also going to be made available in Tamil very shortly. It will be published over this month.
I will not attempt to speak in Tamil because Tamil பேசினா எல்லாரும் ஓடி போயிங்க. So I will not try it. And I don't have the kind of vocabulary, unfortunately, to deal with such topics. So the story of the Sarasvati river is interesting because it touches on so many things. As Badri was saying, it has a lot to do with the Indus civilization, but it brought a whole new facet, or let us say a huge chunk of this civilization to light. It has to do with the earliest Sanskrit text, which is the Rig Veda. Because it so happens, I'm anticipating a little, that the Sarasvati in the Rig Veda is the most highly revered river. There are many rivers which are mentioned in the Rig Veda as Hindu, like Shududri, which is the Satluj, and so many others. Ganga, by the way, is of no importance whatsoever in the Rig Veda. It appears just once, and we will see when. But what is extremely strange, and there's a mystery there which is still unsolved, which is that Sarasvati is the only river in the Rig Veda which is deified, which is turned into a goddess, so highly praised, so highly revered, that it is no longer it is she, becomes a goddess. And we do not know why Sindhu was not a god or a goddess. There is no explanation to be given. This is the fact. But what is even more mysterious is that this is the only river which, at a certain point, after the Rig Veda, disappears in stages. So we will explore that story, which has had a great impact on the Indian mind at a certain point of time, because you see, it became a kind of standard image. The disappearance of the Sarasvati in Sanskrit literature, I'm not a Sanskritist, I must confess, but if you read Kalidasa, for example, he uses in a few places this image of, the king who is going to be forgotten, like the Sarasvati was forgotten. It becomes a kind of image of something that is lost, a loss. In fact, the place where Sarasvati disappeared, this appears in several Ramanas, was called Vinashana. You know, Vinashana means loss, disappearance, ruin. The word is used every day in Tamil as Nashtam. It is the same word. So there is something peculiar there. And but then when I wrote my book and I went deeply into the whole discovery of the river, how it was traced on the land, and then tracing it through the literature, something became clear to me that in a way Sarasvati had a crucial role. The disappearance of the river had a very crucial role in this movement to the east, because if you remember, the Indus civilization is in the 3rd millennium BC. You have to keep that bracket in mind. And then 2nd millennium BC, nobody is quite sure what happens. A lot of very confused movements have been traced on the grounds by archaeology, but we cannot still have very solid patterns emerging. But in the 1st millennium BC, then there is something very solid emerging, which is in the Gangetic Valley. Suddenly the Gangetic civilization comes up. So we have a gap of 1 millennium between those two civilizations. And the established dogma, if you take the textbooks which your children have to study at school, you will find that this millennium between the two is supposed to be the millennium when the Aryans came into India, 2nd millennium BC, and either they destroyed the Indus civilization, I'll come to that later, depending on which textbook you pick up, or in any case they traveled all the way to the Ganges, cleared the virgin forest and established the Gangetic civilization. So the result is that we have, according to the standard theory, which is now hotly contested, we have a pre-Aryan or pre-Vedic civilization, which is the Indus or Harappan civilization, and we have an Aryan or Vedic civilization, which is the Gangetic. And between the two, no connections whatsoever. Because they were created, we are told, by two different peoples, two different cultures, and there is no connection. Now we will see that this picture does not match what has been found on the ground, especially in the last few decades. Now with these few words, let me get started. And starting with the problem which faced the European Indologists in the early 19th century, when for the first time they were able to read the Sanskrit text. You know, it is only in the 1780s that the very first text of Sanskrit, beginning with the Bhagavad Gita, in fact, by Wilkins, were translated into European languages. And then very fast translations into English, French, German, later on Italian and so on appeared. It created a kind of revolution in European thought, literature, poetry, etc., and philosophy to some extent. But they went to the root, which was the Rig Veda, and for this we have to be grateful to Max Müller. Whatever his faults in misinterpretations, he still did this tremendous work of compiling a complete edition of the Rig Veda and publishing it in Sanskrit for the very first time. Now, you see, Indians at that time were not curious about the kind of physical features. They knew the hymns, and they were praying to the gods and goddesses and so on. And the hymns were used for different purposes, essentially ritualistic. But they were not trying to, pinpoint a history or a geography on the Rig Veda. But this is the task which the European scholars took up immediately. They wanted to know who, when, where, how. All these questions they started putting when they scrutinized the text. These questions, in a way, are un-Indian. We're not really bothered. Today, of course, we are picking up the questions, but they are kind of secondary, but they become very essential to the European scholars. So, when they opened the Rig Veda, they found that there is a certain geography, which is Saptasindhava. And Saptasindhava was assumed to be the Indus in the west, a 5 tributaries and the Sarasvati in the east. We will see why in a moment. In fact, these rivers are all listed at some places, and it was a natural assumption. In other words, the geography that is familiar to the Rig Veda is northwest of the Indian subcontinent, including what is of course today Pakistan. Even Afghan fringes, because several rivers I will show you in a moment are tributaries of the Indus from Afghanistan. And then the whole of Punjab, what we call today Haryana, even parts of Rajasthan, etc. Then we saw that Sarasvati is described as a mighty river, Maho Arna Sarasvati, Sarasvati of the mighty waters. And it has an impetuous flow which is unbroken from the mountain to the sea, Giribhyā Samudra. So this was something which they noted, and they also noted that the Sarasvati, as I said, was the most highly praised river and the only deified river. For it is very likely that this is the beginning of the Indian tradition of regarding rivers as goddesses. You know, even the Kaveri is a goddess. But in the time of the Rig Veda, this applies only to the Sarasvati again and to no other rivers. So she is Amritame, Naditame, Devitame Sarasvati, the best of mothers, the best of rivers, the best of goddesses. Very high praise. Right. Then, there is one critical hymn in the 10th mandala. Very critical, and I might say uncharacteristic of the Rig Veda, because the Rig Veda again is not bothered. It is not a tourist guide. It does not give you directions. It is not worried about painting a geography and giving you directions. But in this particular hymn, luckily we have a lot of geographical data. In 2 brief mantras, in a hymn called the Nadistuti Sukta, the hymn in praise of the rivers, you can see, I'm sorry. I will not attempt to read out this Sanskrit because I cannot read Vedic Sanskrit properly. But you can see that Ganga appears here, and that is the only time. Perhaps there is a second reference to Ganga. But that is all. The river is non-existent otherwise in the Rig Veda. Then you have Yamuna, Sarasvati, Shudri, which is the Satluj, Parushni, which is the Ravi river, Ashitmiya, which is the Chenab, and so on. We have all the other tributaries all the way to Sindhu, the Indus. Then Kubha is the Kabul river. Gomatim is what is today, it is Goman, it is the Goman river. These are Afghan tributaries of the Indus. So what you see is that in just 2 brief mantras, the composer of this hymn, one of the Vedic rishis, his mind sweeps very fast from Ganga all the way to Afghanistan, and he gives rivers in such an order that if you I will come back to this slide after. Let me see this first. If you place them on the map, Gange, Yamuna, Sarasvati, Shudri, Ashitni, and so on, and then Sindhu and the Kabul, Puram, Gokuma. It's a perfect listing of all the rivers of this northwest in the correct order. Here I have put numbers which correspond to the order of appearance in this particular mantra. So it's quite a feat, first of all, imagining somebody sitting there, some rishi sitting there somewhere, perhaps in the region of the Sarasvati, but we are not sure, and having the entire map in his mind and being able to tell it so clearly. But there was a question. Now, first of all, for those who might say, how do we know that Ashitni is the Chenab or that Shudri is the Satluj? Well, it is thanks to the Greek names. Partly, there are other reasons of continuity within the Sanskrit literature also. But but the Sanskrit names, the Greek name is just been left by the chroniclers of Alexander the Great when he came into India for his campaign in the Indus Valley. They have given us names which are akin to the ancient Sanskrit names, and now this is how we can firmly identify all these rivers. Now, at the very same time, this is a very interesting coincidence. Exactly at the time when these very hymns were being studied by European Sanskritists, Indologists, and they were trying to figure out the data. See, there was one major question facing them, that, okay, there is this Sarasvati between Yamuna and Satluj, but where is it on our maps, on our British maps? We don't see such a river. There is no river between Yamuna and Satluj. And of course all the others are there. Satluj, Jhelum, Indus, whatever river is all there. But Sarasvati, there is no river like that, as far as they thought. But more or less at the same time, starting from the 1820s, several British officials, you would find all the details in my book, started surveying this region. The purpose was that the British were not yet in control of Punjab and Sindh. This would happen in the 1830s and 40s, especially after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So the British were very systematic people. When they were, targeting a certain region, they knew that they had better be familiar with the geographical features, with the ethnic features, even somewhat with the culture of the people and so on. So they sent what they called euphemistically political agents. This was the terminology of the East India Company. They were actually spies, but very official spies, and they went and gave extensive reports on all this region. And one of the things which I found when I studied those reports is that they describe the bed of a wide river known as Ghagar in Haryana and Punjab, and then little lower down it becomes known as Hakra, which is in today's Pakistan. And they are struck by this because it's very huge, they say already 6 miles in places in width. 6 miles is 9 kilometers, more than that. It's a lot for a river. And they notice a lot of local traditions that this river once upon a time flowed, and it is because of its drying up that the region became like a desert. And they also noticed that there were lots of ancient mounds, ruin sites as they call them, on the banks of this Ghagar Hakra river. And finally, at the top of that system, in today's Haryana, they noticed a small stream which was called in Hindi Sarasvati. Sarasvati is obviously a corruption of Sarasvati. So this is all the data which they gave. Now there is one man, he happens to be French, his name is Louis-Vivien de Saint-Martin, who was a very eminent geographer of his time. He was the president of the French Société de Géographie, and he was extremely interested in recreating the Rig-Vedic geography. In fact, he wrote in 1855 a thick book called The Geography of Northwest India According to the Rig-Vedic Hymns. 1855, you see, as soon as the text began to be translated into French and English, and then, because he was a geographer, he was aware of the work of these surveyors which the British had sent. He put two plus two together, and he said, this Ghagar Hakra has got to be the Vedic Sarasvati. He's the first person to have proposed this identification. And he said, still quite recognizable, and it was followed far to the west. And this discovery confirmed the correctness of the tradition. That is to say, the Indian tradition, that there was a massive river there. So, this is how the picture begins to take place. Then later on, still in the 19th century, several British scholars, especially C.F. Oldham, who was in fact a sergeant major in the Indian Army, proposed again that the Gaga was formerly the Sarasvati. That name is still known amongst the people, he says. He is referring here to the small Sarasvati, which is a tributary of the Gaga. So you see how the picture, to place in a very natural way, it was in fact endorsed by Max Muller himself. He had no problem with this identification because it made a perfect match with the Rig Veda. 1962, this is one of the first maps, but actually I saw in the Saraswati Mahal library last year in Tanjore. There is a map which I briefly referred to in my book, but I didn't have the map at the time, by James Rennell, a great British geographer. In the 1780s published a map where Sarasvati is actually named on the map in place of the Gaga. I hope in the next edition I'll be able to obtain a copy from the Sarasvati Mahal library. So here you can see, you can see 1962 Sarasvati here in Haryana and Gaga in Punjab, and so on. There are many maps now appearing. This is by Alexander Cunningham, who was the founder of the Archaeological Survey of India, and who published a big book called Geography of Ancient India, something like that. It is still in print. It's a very important reference, and you can see how he places here the Sarasvati River also in Haryana, flowing past Ambala here and going further downstream. This is a map from a French book, 1881, on Vedic India, and here you can see also how Sarasvati is identified with Gaga and flowing on the edge of the great Indian desert, which is today Rajasthan. One more map, but I can skip it because it is so small, but this is Sarasvati and this is Gaga. This is by the same C.F. Oldham, and you can see how he makes the entire river flow all the way to the run of Kutch. I'll come back to this run of Kutch later. And to show that there is a consensus among Indologists, this is by the great French Indologist Louis Renou, one of the many maps which he published. This map is supposed to try to map the times of the Mahabharata. And you can see that he has placed some of the kingdoms appearing in the Mahabharata on the map, but at the same time he represents here clearly the Sarasvati and the Drishavati, which is another Vedic river mentioned in the Rig Veda as associated with the Sarasvati. Now you see, this is the Vinashana I was telling you about, and here you have a dotted line. Now this Vinashana first appears in the Brahmanas, which are long commentaries on the Vedic Samhitas, which were composed many centuries after the Vedas, and then later on in the Mahabharata itself, we find that the Vinashana, which was probably initially somewhere here, has already shifted upward. There is one scholar, O.P. Bharadwaj, I've mentioned some of his papers in my book, was traced through the entire Sanskrit literature the evolution of this point, Vinashana, where the Sarasvati disappears. And in fact in the Mahabharata, there is a whole chapter dedicated to a pilgrimage made by Balarama along the Sarasvati. You know that, you remember the story, Balarama refused to take sides in the war. He did not participate actively in the war. So while the war was going on, he made this pilgrimage, starting, the Mahabharata tells us, starting from Prabhas, which might be today Prabhas is located here, but we don't know exactly whether this is the original Prabhas. It might have been somewhere here also. And he went upstream the Sarasvati all the way to the source of the Sarasvati in a range of hills, today called Shivalik hills. So he describes all the ashrams on the banks of the river Sarasvati and how the whole region reverberates with the recitation of Vedic hymns and so on and so forth, and he is thrilled. So also there are many names given of tirthas all along the banks of the Sarasvati. And so this is, but the upshot is that in Mahabharata the Sarasvati is definitely broken, and the text tells us that the Sarasvati disappears under the sands. And there are breaks in the pilgrimage of Balaram. It is not a continuous river anymore as it was in the Rig Veda. This is very important. I'll come back to this one at the conclusion of my talk. So, this is the picture as we had it in the 19th century. Now, in the 20th century, in addition to the textual evidence and the topographic evidence, we have new contributions from various researchers. This Herbert Wilhelmi is a German geographer who spent a lot of time on the evolution of the Sarasvati, and he published 4 or 5 maps trying to show the evolution of the river, the progressive disappearance of the river in the course of time. I'm showing you only the first one here, where he proposes, in fact, he takes up the theory that Oldham in the 19th century had already proposed. You see, this is the Satluj here. And what was proposed was that today the Satluj flows like this. There's a sharp bend near Rupa, and the river today flows like this into the Bias. Now, what was proposed is that the Satluj flowed into the Sarasvati channel, and or most of it at least. And similarly, the Yamuna here, which today the Yamuna of course flows past Delhi, or through Delhi if you prefer. It was proposed that the Yamuna was flowing into the Sarasvati. In other words, that this region of the Sarasvati, which is located between the Gangetic system in the east and the Indus system in the west. See, this is what is called technically an interfluve. It is in Sanskrit it is called a doha. It is a region of 2 rivers, between 2 rivers. So this region could have been a little less elevated in ancient times, and some tectonic event would have uplifted this narrow region here, which corresponds more or less to Haryana. And by uplifting it, it would have driven away the Satluj to the west and the Yamuna to the east to their present position. How could this happen? Quite simply, because in fact it happens all the time. You know that the peninsula of India is a certain tectonic plate. It is called the Indian plate. It sinks under the Himalaya, under the Asian plate all the time. So, this sinking of the Indian plate under the Asian plate, which is what created the uplift of the Himalayas some 60 million years ago or so, this subsidence is a slow but continual process which creates tensions at the boundary between these 2 tectonic plates. And these tensions are what makes the north of India so prone to earthquakes, some of them very devastating. We know that. So it is supposed that one of these earthquakes, and Professor Bardia of Bangalore has proposed certain dates because some evidence has come to light, would have uplifted this region, and the whole Indo-Gangetic plains are so flat, you can walk from northern Pakistan all the way to Calcutta without encountering a single hillock on the way if you wish. So the whole region is so flat that any slight change in the level would result in very important shifts of the rivers. In fact, even today, Ganga continues to shift in some parts of this course. Bengalis know that very well. Indus shifted quite a lot last year when these terrific floods took place in Pakistan. The monsoon was so intense. So these Indo-Gangetic rivers are very prone to shifting because of the flatness of the terrain, number one. Number two, the tectonic nature of the whole region. And number three, the huge masses of alluvium which they carry down from the Himalayas. They always carry tons and tons of alluvium, which is what has made the Indo-Gangetic plain so rich and fertile for agriculture. But this alluvium has got to be deposited somewhere as the river progresses. By depositing alluvium, sometimes that itself forces the river to shift to another course. So the geology of the whole region is now well understood. It is not a stable region as far as the river systems are concerned. Now, one more discipline came in, which is satellite imagery. In the 1970s, and you have here the very first satellite photography composed from various photos taken by the American Landsat satellites, where you can locate the Yamuna, you can locate the Satluj somewhere here, and then there is suddenly a dark track appearing here, which is precisely the footprint of the Gagar-Hakra river, which had been identified by topographic surveys. Why is it so visible? Not because you have a deep valley. There is no deep valley there. There is a kind of mild depression, which is visible. The topographers saw that depression, but there is humidity, dampness along the course of this now dry river. And this was noted by the British surveyors because they noted that all along the coast the villagers had dug wells and fresh water was available all along the course of the dry course of this river. Whereas wells a little further away were not usable. The water was usually brackish or there was no water at all. So there is a region here where dampness is there is still humidity underground. And this underground humidity creates a different pattern of vegetation on the surface, which is what the satellite captures. Then we have lots of satellite studies, studies of the satellite, what is known as the paleo beds, the ancient abandoned beds, which satellite easily picked up. And quite a lot of them, in fact the whole region here, this is Haryana again, is crisscrossed with such abandoned beds. But they found that they were indeed ancient beds connecting the Satluj here with the Gagar system. And similarly with the Yamuna. So the theory which had been proposed in the 19th century made in fact quite a lot of sense from the point of view of satellite imagery. This is now today you can indulge in satellite imagery right from your desktop. Sitting at home, you can do your own satellite research if you like. This is from National Geographic website, and you can see here so clearly, and you can, all of you can access this at home. This is Ganga, this is Yamuna, this is the Satluj with a sharp bend here, and this is again in between the two, the Gagar-Hakra. I remind you that there is no water today, but till the 19th century the British noted that during heavy monsoons, water used to flow all the way to what is today the Indo-Pakistan border. Up to this point, water sometimes flowed in this, so it was still a seasonal river. Now the British dug a lot of canals in, not only the British, also some Maharajas dug a lot of canals in what is today Haryana and Indian Punjab, all this region, so that in fact the seasonal waters were diverted to agriculture. So today it is extremely rare to have water flowing beyond Haryana in the Ganga. Now the ISRO, Indian Satellite Research Organization, has spent a lot of time researching this problem of the Sarasvati River because of course they are well equipped to do so. And they have a center in Jodhpur, the regional remote sensing center, whose scientists have spent quite a lot of time mapping the different channels of the Sarasvati. And you see, through enhanced photography, they don't just take a simple photo like you or I would do. They take many photos in different parts of the spectrum, in visible light, in infrared, in ultraviolet, and so on. And then they combine it all, and they have certain digital techniques of enhancement. And after all this treatment, they notice certain dark patches. And you see, this is the region in western Rajasthan which is completely a desert. There is no vegetation whatsoever. And yet they find that this is in fact the Pakistan border here, that there are traces of water underground. And when the Rajasthan Water Board drilled those places, especially near Tanot here, they found that wherever these dark blotches appeared, they were able to find fresh water at a depth of 30 to 60 meters, which is very shallow. Going back to today, if you want water, you have to drill to sometimes 300 meters depth. So this is remarkably shallow for a total desert area, which shows that there must have been a water system, and in fact those waters were dated by the VARC through isotope method. I mean, I've given all the details in my book. And they were dated as being relic waters, paleo waters, ancient waters, which have now been recently recharged. These were ancient aquifers, which are, if you like, the relic of the Sarasvati. So this is the totality of the map drawn by the ISRO people. And you can see that here now the Sarasvati has a complex history of shifting. So it is not a single neat bed. There are many beds which it occupied at different points, and it ended in different locations in the Ran of Kutch. Now this is one aspect of the story. Second aspect you might say. Now the third aspect, which is most important, and which is the aspect that will trigger what people love to call the controversy of the Sarasvati River. Because up to this time there was no controversy. There was unanimity in the 19th and even till the middle of the 20th century that this Ganga Bhakra has got to be the Sarasvati, because that is where the Rig Veda tells us that there was a river between the Yamuna and the Sandwich. There is no other river there. Now, you have heard of the Indus civilization, which some textbooks persist in calling Indus Valley civilization. Indus Valley because that was the original term. The first sites discovered in the 1920s were Mohenjo Harappa in the Indus Valley and some others. Here you have a view of the beautiful highly geometric town planning of the upper city of Mohenjo-daro, the Acropolis. So this was a very impressive urban civilization that came to light in the 1920s. And the hallmarks were a very high civic order, efficient administration, drainage system properly maintained with well calculated slopes so that the drains would not get choked when it rains. And on many grounds, without any joke, the organization that these people applied on the ground would easily rival, if not excel, the drainage systems that we have in most cities of India today. So, highly efficient administration, yet very strangely, completely invisible rulership. We do not know who ruled this widespread civilization. The rulers were never depicted on seals or pottery or tablets or anything. And this is quite unlike contemporary civilizations in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, where, for example, in Egypt, the pharaoh is glorified all over the place. You can't miss him. He's there in the temples, he's there in the palaces, he's there everywhere. He is deified and so on and so forth. There is nothing like this here. We don't know where the rulers lived, except that they must have lived in some of these structures of the Acropolis. Perhaps in this huge building of 23 by 69 meters, but even that doesn't, except for the dimension, it doesn't stand out as a palace or anything like that. So this is the civilization which gradually came to light, and as I said, initially all the sites were located in the Indus Valley, hence the term. Even though during John Marshall's time itself, new sites came to light in Balochistan, one site in Haryana, this is Ropar, and one in Gujarat, which was Rampur. Then, 1942, something dramatic took place, thanks to the expedition conducted by Sir Orelstein. Orelstein was a very intrepid explorer, adventurer, archaeologist, Sanskrit scholar incidentally. He was the first who translated this Kashmiri historical chronicle, yes. So he gave us a very faithful English translation. And he had been always interested. One chair here. So Sir Orelstein had been very interested in desert places, very forbidding, remote places. Now, when he was 78, in 1942, he decided to explore this region. He had actually authored a paper in 1917 on the identification of the Sarasvati with the Ganga, which he accepted. And he said, let me go and see, because he had a kind of intuition that there could be an eastern extension of the Sarasvati River in this region. So at the age of 78, on horseback, camelback, he started his expedition here, and he started from this point, Garibanga, but he moved very fast into what is today Pakistan. In those days, this portion was known as the Bikaner state, and this one was known as the Bahawalpur state. So he missed the sites here because he was a bit in a hurry to finish his expedition during the winter season. After the month of March, the whole region is unbearably hot. And he found here for some 70 sites, at least 20 of which he identified as being of Harappan culture. How did he determine this? Because of the pottery essentially. The pottery was of the same time, and he was very familiar with the Harappan civilization in Balochistan. So he identified the pottery type, pottery designs, a few seals, typical Indus seals which you found, and some other artifacts. And therefore, for the first time, he said that Harappan civilization extended eastward beyond the Indus Valley proper. Now, with the partition, 1947, this is the result of the partition, the Indian archaeologists were left only with Ropar and Rampur and no other Harappan site. So, 1950, they started exploring this region here, which was just a continuation of Mr. Orenstein's work, but further upstream, and little by little they discovered a lot of Harappan sites, so much so that this is, for example, Kali Mangam here, this is Banawali. There are new sites like Farmana, Raki, Hari, which are being explored right now. And to cut a long story short, well, some of them have since, you see this is a mapping by ISRO, where you can see the Harappan sites following the bed, the dry bed of this Gagar Akram. And the upshot is that if you take only the mature Harappan phase, that is to say the phase during which the cities were functioning, the urban phase of the industrialization, if you like. During this phase, we have, as of present count, little over 1,100 sites identified throughout the northwest of India and Pakistan. And out of these, 360 are in the Sarasvati Valley alone, so it is a huge chunk. Then another big heartland, and quite a surprise also, is Gujarat. Gujarat, 310 just of Harappan sites. Pakistan, that is Indus plus Balochistan plus the northern Pakistan regions, northwest frontiers region, adds up to 416, with only 130 or 140 in the Indus Valley, properly speaking. So you can see that in fact, the designation of Indus civilization is no longer appropriate. It doesn't describe the full extent. Therefore, the late Dr. S.P. Gupta, famous archaeologist, proposed in the 1980s that this should be renamed as Indus Sarasvati civilization. The terminology was partly accepted by some of his colleagues, but the controversy, I'll come to that in a moment, made a few other archaeologists shrink from it, and some prefer the neutral term of Harappan civilization. In fact, even Indus Sarasvati civilization is not a perfect term, because Gujarat was neither part of the Indus nor of the Sarasvati river systems. So, doesn't matter whatever terminology you adopt, the fact is that most of the, not most, but let us say roughly 1/3 of the sites are located in the Sarasvati Valley alone. In fact, it becomes a much higher proportion if you consider the late Harappan stage, which means after the collapse of the urban order, which takes place about 2000 BC or 1900 BC. I'll come to that in a moment. So, to show you, however, that many archaeologists, and here I have taken maps from Western archaeologists alone. There are people like Kenoya, Porcel, I Ching, Mackintosh, and one or two others, Erdosi. You can see that all of them have put, at least, even if they did not all accept the Indus Sarasvati term, they accepted that the ancient Sarasvati is the river that fed all these sites. Now, let us have a quick visit to a few, very brief, a few of the sites on the, in the Sarasvati basin, properly speaking. This is Banawali in Haryana, on the northern bank of one arm, not the main Gagar river, but one of the tributaries of it. And here we have quite a large fortified city with an acropolis, again, or upper city. Unfortunately, excavations were very limited and partial, but the same kind of town planning was found as in Mohenjo-daro Harappa, that is drainage system, some geometrical alignments of the streets, you see at right angles sometimes. And in the Acropolis, there were some very large houses, some of which even had the luxury of water basins raised at a height of about 5 feet, terracotta water basins for washing hands, which is a very modern utility we might think, but they were using that even in Harappan times. Sorry. This is Kalimangan, which I show you on the map, with a very neat division between upper city, where there were a few habitations, but also on the southern side, huge platforms which apparently had a purely ritualistic purpose. There were no habitations in this section, but a series of organs were found by the excavators who were Professor B.B. Lal, who is still with us at the age of 90, and the late D.K. Thapa. The road down, also highly geometric alignment of the streets, is where most of the habitations were located. And you can see that it is right on the edge of the river Ghaghar, identified with the Sarasvati. And nowadays, some scholars recently have contested the fact that this Sarasvati river was flowing at all during Harappan times. But the archaeology tells us that definitely these Kaligangams, as we may call them, were counting on the water supply from the river, because number one, there are no reservoirs anywhere found in this city. Unlike other places which I will show you later, there are no reservoirs here, and there are very, very few wells. Mohenjo-daro has several hundred wells, very neatly constructed brick wells. But Kalimangan, only 2 or 3 wells have come to light. So if you have neither wells nor reservoirs, only the river can be your water supply. So the architecture, this itself is clear. In addition, look at the architecture, look at the way the entrances into the upper city and lower city are designed. This entrance is facing the riverbed, and it has even a recess. It is recessed. You see this angle, which means it is meant to be a kind of more controllable entrance. By narrowing it down, you can have guards controlling the movement of goods in and out of the city. So, the very fact that these 2 entrances face the riverbed tells us that they were expecting people to move in or out of the city by boat on the river. Otherwise, there would be no point in locating the entrances there. This is a view of one house in Kalimangan. The reason I show it is because there is something remarkable going on there, which is the presence of flooring tiles. Flooring tiles in 3rd millennium BC are not at all, an indispensable feature. You can very well live without flooring tiles. In fact, most Indians today still live without flooring tiles. But they have obviously sufficient prosperity to afford this kind of luxury. So this is something interesting. There are other signs elsewhere of economic prosperity. This is Dhoravira. Dhoravira is located in the Rann of Kutch. It is a huge city on a small island in the Rann of Kutch, where the Sarasvati Delta might have ended, as I showed you on the maps. And Dhoravira is amazing because if you visit it today, I was lucky to visit it twice. It is just in the middle of nowhere. The whole region is semi-desert. And once you are in Dhoravira, if you want to buy a packet of biscuits, you have to travel 100 kilometers. So it is such a remote area, it's almost on the Indo-Pakistan border, just 20 kilometers away. You have to cross the Rann and you reach Pakistan. And yet, the Harappans were able to establish there this huge, thriving city, which was fortified with 3 levels of fortifications. The outer town, and then you can see in violet the middle town, and in blue the upper city. And all this with rigorous geometry, amazing application of precise ratios, I'm not going into that. I mean, there are some details in my book, which means that these people have a tremendous ability to plan and execute on the ground. And you see, today when we have a new city, very rarely in India, I mean, if you can count the number of planned cities in India on the fingers of your hand. There is New Delhi, Chandigarh, and maybe cities like Gandhinagar, Gujarat, and one or two more. Otherwise, our cities are usually not planned. They are just like Chennai is not a planned city. It is an overgrown village. It's a village that grows and grows and grows, nothing else. But the Harappans were able to, on virgin land, to plan, execute those meticulously laid out cities. So that is quite remarkable. This is a view. This is a view of I did not show you the. You see, this area here is probably where the rulers lived. It was called castle by the archaeologists, and it is a heavily fortified area. You see here the thick walls, and these walls were as thick as 19 meters in places. 19 meters is quite a lot. 19 meters is going to be twice the length of this wall. So this is just the thickness of the wall of the castle. And you can see it here. This is one entrance into the castle. This is beyond this photo. This is the northern entrance. And the whole place is built with massive stones, which were dressed by bronze tools. Because we are in the Bronze Age. We are not yet in the Iron Age. That comes in the first millennium BC. So with bronze tools, they have found a way to harden the bronze almost to the extent of iron by addition of small doses of arsenic in the bronze, and that made a very tough bronze, which then could be used to dress stones. So the whole construction is extremely massive. But one feature of Dhoravira is the huge reservoirs, because here there were only two small seasonal streams, but not even streams, channels, palams as we call them in Tamil. So these two palams were diverted into the cities through the networks of dams, so that during the very brief monsoon of the run of Kutch, very brief, all the rainfall should be harvested inside the sea. And they created a network of huge reservoirs. This one is 73 meters in length, 1.5 times an Olympic swimming pool. And this one, which was cut in the sheer rock, is 33 meters in length. And all these reservoirs were connected by a network of underground drains. The whole thing is mind-boggling. The whole planning, quality of the planning, and totally 17 hectares out of 48 were kept for water harvesting alone. So 1/3 of the entire city was kept for water harvesting. In fact, without water harvesting on such a scale, they could not have lived through the year. The water supply of the city would just disappear. So they were able to plan that if we have to have a city in such a remote place with this type of climate, this is the amount of area we must earmark for water storage. I mean, this is, without even, this is quite a remarkable achievement. Evidence of shipping is available from a few tablets. These are river boats, but we do know that the Harappans were in touch with all these civilizations which you see here. Iran, Magan Dirmun, which corresponds to the Persian Gulf, Mesopotamia at the top of the Persian Gulf, Iran in northwest Iran, and in Central Asia, Bactria and Marjana, also called the Oxus civilization. So these are all civilizations, contemporary civilizations. The only thing here which is not contemporary is the Ganges. there is no Gangetic civilization, as I said, in the 3rd millennium. It will come in the 1st millennium BC. So, in all the other civilizations, Harappan seals, weight systems, and pottery and other artifacts have been found. For example, Mesopotamia alone had some 40 Indus seals. So, we know that the Harappans were going out and trading with all these civilizations. The big mystery is, what were they importing back home in exchange? And the answer is, we don't know. Because there are no traces in Harappan cities of Mesopotamian artifacts or Iranian, or there are a few from Bactria on the western margins, but very few. So, archaeologists assume that it could have been something like silver or gold, something that would be recyclable, or perhaps some food items, consumables of some kind. Otherwise, there is nothing very visible that the Harappans were lacking at home. It looks as if they were kind of driven by a need to explore beyond their borders. And this is in a way something typically Indian. It will be reproduced during the early historical times when you see Indians very keen to trade all the way to Africa and Egypt. And in fact, they were always having the balance of trade was always in favor of India, even during the time of Roman trade. Typical long carnelian beads, which were highly prized by royal families in Mesopotamia. The one reason, apart from the semi-precious stone itself, was the fact that these beads were drilled lengthwise so that you could make long necklaces with them. And this was a secret technology which the Harappans had. They made a synthetic stone consisting of several powders of different hard stones mixed together and fired at high temperature for several days, which would create a synthetic, very, very hard stone, which then they would chip into drill bits, and then those drill bits would be manually operated to drill these lengthwise. These are about 3 inches long, and it is estimated that for 1 inch, 1 full day of labor was required by one craftsman. So, a lot of Harappan crafts were exported. Now, this is of course a very, very brief survey of the main features of the Harappan civilization. But what has come to light in recent times, actually not really in recent times, is a certain continuity between Harappan and Gangetic, which, as I said initially, our textbooks do not reflect. They keep separating those two civilizations. Now, first of all, let us go back to the Sarasvati basin and see here how these dots are Harappan sites. And now we are in the early Harappan phase, that is to say, before the rise of the cities. This is 3500 to 2008 or 700 BC. This is a rural phase, but the rural settlements are becoming towns, the trade between all of them is expanding, and the technologies are developing. And what you can see here, as far as the pattern of sites is concerned, is a continuous line of sites along the Sarasvati, right down to what is today the Cholistan desert of Pakistan. So, this corresponds to a phase where you could say that the Sarasvati is unbroken. The river is continuous. Now, look at what happens during the urban phase, that is to say, 2600 to 1900 BC are the 7 centuries during which the cities thrive. There is already one break here. See here, for 200 kilometers, or at least 100 kilometers, that is just across the Indo-Pakistan border, you can see that there is a gap. There are no mature Harappan sites there. So it shows the beginning of the break of the river And therefore these sites here must have been fed by Palaeon channels which have been traced on the map from the Satluj. So if we have to date the first break of the Sarasvati river, then this would be more or less the date. Then let us continue. 900 BC, something very dramatic takes place. Look at the central basin of the Sarasvati river. Suddenly, you have no signs left at all. We are in the late Harappan phase. The urban order has disintegrated. There are relics of it in some sites here and there, but mostly the sites which are identifiable as late Harappan are hugging the hills, because a lot of streams, of course, are still flowing down from the hills. But this river is gone. It no longer exists. Otherwise, we would have sites there. So this is a major disappearance of the Sarasvati river. Now, this is all fine, but it creates problems. I will explain in a minute. These three maps which you saw are maps which I prepared by collating maps which have been published by several archaeologists. But even very recently, last year, a paper published in Current Science by 3 scientists was doing a parallel research and concluding very much the same thing. You see, at 1900 BC, suddenly this area becomes empty of sites, whereas it was almost full of them before. Now, the urban order collapses, and I would like to say at this point that archaeologists have rejected the old interpretation that Aryans came and destroyed the inner cities. They find absolutely no sign of human conflict in Harappan cities. There is no sackling of the city, there is no slaughter of population, there is no man-made destruction. Not only that, very curiously, the Harappan civilization overall appears to have been a very peaceful one. There was no military structure. There were no weapons of war, like helmets or shields or very sharp spears or swords. There was nothing like military barracks. There are no violent scenes of warfare depicted in the Harappan art. Unlike, again, if you go to Mesopotamia or Egypt, you can find warfare depicted all over the place. The pharaoh crushing adversaries and so on and so forth. Nothing like this is depicted here. So the notion of military confrontation seems totally alien to the Harappan mind. That's number one. Number two, there are absolutely, as I said, no archaeological signs of man-made destruction. So if there is no man-made brutal ending of the Harappan cities, why did they disintegrate at all? Now, archaeologists are still debating the issue because it's quite complex. There could have been social factors. Simply the overstretch of this huge civilization, which covered almost 1 million square kilometers. Perhaps the administration at some point could no longer control such a vast area with the communications available in those times. Another explanation, more and more prevalent, is change of climate. By 2200 BC, there was a very long drought affecting not only northwest India, but parts of Africa, parts of Central Asia, and Mesopotamia also. And a lot of kingdoms in those regions fell because of this growing aridity in 2200 BC onward. Then the drying up of the Sarasvati, as I showed you, 1900 BC, is the end of the urban phase, but it is also the date, more or less. Of course, it would not have happened overnight. It is also the date when we find a sudden change in the settlement pattern, which points to the drying of the Sarasvati. So it all seems to show that these drastic changes in the Harappan environment made city life unsustainable. See, if tomorrow in Madras or Chennai, you have no longer electricity in your homes and the municipality no longer supplies water, what will you do? you will go to some village, suddenly you will remember your distant uncles or grandfathers or something, and you will have to migrate through the villages, because you can still live in villages without all these urban amenities. Cities are very fragile environments. We always tend to forget that today. So the Harappans would have learned the lesson and migrated back to a rural stage. But even though there is a break in terms of governance, administration, city or urban order, there is no real break in the culture. And we have many examples. I can only show very few of cultural continuity between Harappan civilization and classical civilization of India. These are, for example, chessmen from Bhutan, which look very much like some modern chessmen. They may not have been precisely our game of chess, but some games born, some board's game which would have been the ancestor of such board's games documented in the Gangetic civilization. These dice from Harappa look surprisingly modern, but they are 4,500 years old. So they are probably the origin of our modern dice. A lot of symbols, Harappan symbols, survived in modern India. On your left, there is a symbol called the endless knot, and it is reproduced exactly as it is in a number of inscriptions of historic times. The one on the right is from Gujarat, and it is dated sometime in the 8th century AD. So you find that this is in fact a royal emblem. And in fact, this symbol has survived even in South India. It is used in Rangolis, columns. And some friends told me that sometimes it is taken as a symbol of the footprint of Lord Krishna. So this is a symbol which is typically Harappan. Of course, this swastika is a famous symbol, not only in India, in many parts of the world. But its presence on hundreds of Harappan tablets makes it clear that it was a highly sacred symbol for the Harappans. It is even one of the Indus signs, in fact, of the Indus script. But as we know, it is also a sacred symbol for classical Hinduism, Jainism, as well as Buddhism. So obviously here the continuity is undeniable from Harappan culture onward. Then this great bath of Mohenjo-daro, famous great bath, you would all have seen such a picture, meticulously built and waterproofed by special Harappan techniques to contain water. Initially, archaeologists were highly influenced by models of the Roman Empire. So they thought, like, as in the Roman Empire, this must have been a collective bath, a public bath. Maybe even a hot steam bath, some people even speculated. But it didn't stand to reason, because very soon they discovered that almost every house in Mohenjo-daro had an individual bathroom. Can you imagine the degree of sanitation, obsession almost with hygiene? If every house had a bathroom, then there was no need of a public bath, obviously. So this would have served other purposes. And the assumption today is that this is, in fact, even the Marxist historian Didi Koshambi called this a Pushkarini. He said this is the prototype of the bathing tanks in Hindu temples, where you go for a ritual bath. And there is so far no better explanation than this. Then the presence of nature worship is very clean on Harappan tablets. This terracotta tablet shows you a tree with a clear platform. And you represent a tree in a platform. In fact, this is done very often in the Mauryan art. It is called technically a tree railing. On a lot of coins also you can find it. And this migrated down to the Sangam age coins, where we find similar depictions. So you represent a tree like this if you want to show that it is specially revered. Otherwise you would not put a platform. So tree worship is of Harappan origin in India. Then fire worship, highly controversial because it reminds us instantly of the Vedic rituals, and yet pretty much undeniable, at least in 2-3 sets of structures. One of which is at Godhana in Gujarat near Ahmedabad. You find this big structure in a street. It measures 2.5 by 2.5 meters approximately, and therefore too large to be used simply for cooking purposes. If you're going to cook, you would have a much smaller structure. This is what is found in individual houses. This one also is on a street. Therefore, it is a public structure. And what was found inside was purely ash mixed with these terracotta cakes. And nothing else, no bones, therefore no cooking, and the Harappans were not vegetarian. So wherever, in private houses, such cooking hearths have been found, usually they have also found bones. This is not the case here. And then the presence of a huge jar, painted jar here, which evokes, the taking of some, whatever it may be, ghee or oil or something from a jar to pour it into the fire. So this is a good case for a fire altar. In addition, there are other conveys. This one, Manawali, is even clearer because you have an enclosing structure of in a semicircular shape, and this worker gives you the scale, and then within that you have another semicircular structure, and then here the excavator, Dr. R.S. Bish, found 1 foot thick of ash, just ash and nothing else. So obviously this was a place used for ritual fire rituals of some kind. And similarly, there is a row of 7 fire altars which was found in Kalimangam, in the upper town of Kalimangam. And again in a place which would not have been used for, say, cooking or such other purposes. So fire worship was practiced at least in some parts of the Harappan civilization. So far such structures have not come to light in Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, or they were perhaps interpreted differently. Then lots of objects which are very familiar to today's Indian, especially if he is familiar with his culture. You have here the conch shell, used for blowing. The tip of the conch shell has been cut off, and this is the origin of the tradition. Sri Krishna and his conch shell at the start of the Great War, for example. This is of Harappan origin undeniably. Similarly, you would have seen some priests using an open conch shell like this one on the left to pour something like water on a statue or something of the kind. So this is also of Harappan origin, and you can see that lines here were incised and filled with red pigment, which is proof that this was a ritual object. It was a decorated object in addition. Worship of Mother Goddess, identifiable because of the 2 oil lamps on each side of the head. And this is, of course, the Mother Goddess is present right from Vedic times all the way to today's Hinduism. It is a main feature of worship in India, and it is present very much in the Harappan civilization. Then certain peculiar figurines like this one in 2800 BC at Naushad, which is in Balochistan, where you see at the parting of the hair presence of red pigment. So this tradition, which is still used today in India, of applying red pigment at the parting of the hair, is of the Harappan origin. Of course, we cannot be sure that it had the same meaning for the Harappans, whether it applied to married ladies or not, that there is no way to tell. But the practice, the ornament, is what matters. The continuity in the ornament. Continuity also in iconography. See this God here, mighty God, whoever he may be, let us not go into the identity of the God because it is somewhat speculative, but the representation of the God in a yogic posture which is identified with the Mula Bandhasana, where it is not the Padmasana as often wrongly stated in the literature. Here you have to join your two heels underneath your waist. It's very difficult. Don't try it without training. You might damage your knees and ankles. And this is the posture to express mastery, physical mastery. And we have in fact these wild animals here, elephant, rhinoceros, tiger and buffalo, obviously controlled by this powerful god. This god also has 3 faces. So this might well be the later iconographic representation of gods with multiple faces or multiple heads even. And this sitting on a raised platform also becomes a classical iconographic feature much later. For example, the Buddha is invariably shown seated on a raised platform. In fact, in Ajanta, Professor Sonthaler, you might remember, in some, below some of the platforms, you will find 2 antelopes or 2 deer. And we have here 2 antelopes. One. So perhaps this is the origin of that, it could be. So iconographic continuity of worship, you can show this to any villager, he will have no hesitation in identifying it today. And not only the linga itself, but the Trishula also represented on a few seats. So it looks as if there was not only nature worship, mother worship, fire worship, but also linga or some kind of a Shiva worship. We cannot be sure of the labels. What matters is the type of worship that was going on. Then it figures in various asanas, very interestingly, as if some kind of Hatha Yoga was already practiced, and you can identify this typical Indian posture here. Very interesting continuity in that respect. Also continuity in practices of meditation. This is the so-called priest king. Let us forget the designation. But he is a figure, whoever he may be, represented in deep contemplation. The eyes are almost closed, and the gaze is concentrated as on the tip of the nose. So this is unusual. And in addition, there is here what is known as a fillet, which should have contained a bead here at the center of the forehead, and a similar decoration here on the top of the right arm. I have seen Orthodox Hindus wearing rudrakshas and other amulets exactly at the same occasion. And this cloth also, this dress over the left shoulder, leaving the right arm free, which is also something we are familiar with. So many such instances of continuities can be documented to such a point that John Marshall, as early as in 1931, declared that the Harappan religion is so characteristically Indian as hardly to be distinguished from still living Hinduism. If I make a statement like this today, the whole national press will pounce on me and say, Hindu, but this is John Marshall, therefore we have to accept it. So, of course, after him, a lot of further archaeologists have documented this continuity in much greater detail. And today, nobody in the archaeological world talks anymore of the divorce between Indus civilization and Gangetic civilization, because the number of continuities in every field are not documented. In technical fields also we can document metallurgy, in agriculture, in construction techniques, and many more areas. So now let me come to the conclusion. I think it is about time. And I will conclude with what I told you at the beginning, this controversy about the Sarasvati. So what is the controversy about? Why should there be a controversy at all? Well, because of this theory that Aryans invaded India in the 2nd millennium BC, and even if we accept that they did not destroy the Indus civilization, let us assume that the Indus civilization had already fallen apart by that time, that they were independently the authors of the Gangetic civilization in the 1st millennium. Now, there are problems with that. The first problem is that if the Rig Veda had been composed by Aryans coming into India around 1500 BC, so the classical date, if you look at the textbooks or the conventional historians, they will tell you Rig Veda 1200 BC or so. That's what Max Muller said, and everybody else has been saying that. Not everybody else. In fact, there were British scholars and German scholars who wanted a much older Rig Veda, but that is a detail. There is a problem, which is that the Rig Veda constantly refers to the ocean, to ships, to storms, to sails, and the waves, and so on. And actually, the symbolism of the ocean is extremely important in the Rig Veda. It may sometimes be purely physical. There are stories, for example, of a king whose name is Buju, and Buju went out into the ocean, and he was caught in a storm, and he was rescued from that storm by the Ashwins. The twin gods, the Ashwins, came to him in the form of two birds and brought him back ashore. This is what, in many hymns, this legend, whatever it may have meant, is told. There are many more legends of, for example, an upper ocean and a lower ocean. So, there is a powerful symbolism. Let us keep the meaning of the symbolism aside for today. The point is, the rishis who composed the Rig Veda were very fond of the image of the ocean. But this would not have been the case if those hymns had been composed by people coming from Afghanistan recently into India, because there are no seas, no oceans in Central Asia, and they would not have been familiar with this element of nature. Now this is one argument. The second argument is more powerful. You remember this Nadishti Sukta which I showed you at the beginning. Imam Me Gange Yamune Sarasvati Vishnuddhari. We move from east to west. We begin with Ganga, we end with the Afghan tributaries of the Indus. Is it natural for Aryan invaders coming from west to east to list the rivers from east to west? What do you think? When the chroniclers of Alexander the Great came with him, and we have some of their texts, you know, the testimonies of Strabo and Aryan and Megasthenes and others, they describe the rivers from west to east because that is in the order in which they encountered the rivers. So this is very odd, and all those who promote the Aryan Invasion Theory never talk about it because it is so embarrassing. But there is more. If the Aryans entered India around 1500 BC and composed their Vedic hymns about 1200 BC, how could they have possibly praised mighty Sarasvati flowing from the mountain to the sea when the archaeological pattern of settlement tells us that after 1900 BC there is no Sarasvati left except perhaps in the upper reaches. But the main river is gone because there are no settlements left. So there is a deep contradiction here. There is a chronological impossibility, as it were, and you see, this is the funny thing which happened, that when this became very clear in the 1980s only, after 1984, the pattern of settlement became very clear. And then we find that a lot of scholars who have previously accepted the identification between Sarasvati and the Gaga stood up and said, well, in that case, this cannot be the Sarasvati. Now you see, in good science, if you have a theory and you find that the facts at some point clash with your theory, normally you have to change your theory. But in humanities, we prefer to change the facts so that we may keep the theory. So this is what happened, and you will find scholars like Professor Raghunath, Shirin Bhatnagar, Suraj Bhatt and others who had in their earlier writings accepted the Sarasvati Ghagan identification. Suddenly they stood up and they said, no, in that case this is not the Sarasvati. So this is the controversy, and there is another question which people do not often realize, which is that, okay, we know where the Harappans lived, And as I told you in the beginning, what is the geography of the Rig Veda? Saptasindhava. Saptasindhava is precisely the Harappan geography also. So we have two apparently different people, the Harappans first, then the Aryans. They share the same geography. How many cultures do we find them? One. The Harappan culture. There are no two civilizations in the Saptasindhava or in northwest India. So, if we have to accept that Rig Veda was composed while the Sarasvati was in full flow, then we would have to accept that it was during not even Harappan times, during the early Harappan times, because the first break comes, if you remember, in about 26 or 2700 BC. So if we want a Sarasvati in full flow, it is before that. And in fact, Rig Veda does not describe an urban environment, which is something that the Marxist historians like Professor Roman and Aparavar have. This is an argument they have used to say that they cannot have been the Harappans, but they could have been the early Harappans who also were not living in an urban area. So, there are various features. Number one, Rig Veda does not know about cities. Number two, it doesn't talk about bricks, Istaka. Whereas Yajur Veda, it talks about bricks quite a lot in the construction of farmlands. So, Rig Veda is in an area, apparently in an era that does not know of bricks. In that case, it will push it back much further in the past. For all these reasons, also astronomical reasons which I am not going to, which were first pointed out by Tilak, by Gangadhar Tilak, my own opinion, my own suggestion is that Rig Veda might date in the 4th millennium BC. So, older than 3000 BC or so. Because that is when we find a Sarasvati in full flow, and that is when we find an environment that more or less matches the descriptions in the Rig Veda. So to conclude, as a summary, and of course here you have a beautiful statue of Sarasvati, I think from Rajapatuna, if I am not mistaken. And you see here that she is holding Parandif Monastery, that is the Veda, because Sarasvati is later regarded as the mother of the Vedas, and she also has this spot, and this means the river. So this statue unifies the various aspects of the Sarasvati. Of course, the wife of Brahma with the rosary, and the river, and the Vedas. So initially in the Veda, Sarasvati is a goddess purely of intuition. She is invoked as an impeller of pure thoughts to purify the mind and so on. This is the kind of invocation given to the Sarasvati in the Rig Veda. It is in the Yajur Veda, which is the second Veda. The Yajur Veda, suddenly Sarasvati becomes the goddess of Vaj, or Vak, speech. And of course, once she is the goddess of speech, with speech is the vehicle of knowledge. So she automatically becomes later on the goddess of knowledge. And then we find there is an important theological study made, which I quoted at the end of my book, that many of these attributes are later transferred to Ganga. And in fact, Ganga assumes importance in the Sanskrit literature as Sarasvati progressively disappears from the horizon. Which is why I have proposed that in some ways, culturally speaking, Ganga is a kind of avatar, rebirth of the Sarasvati. By disappearing, Sarasvati builds a bridge between Indus and Ganga rivers at the physical level, but also at the cultural level between Harappan and Tanjore. And then the Harappans want to keep the memory. You see, keeping the memory is always what matters in India. It is not necessarily the geographical accuracy or historical precision. It is the memory as well as the continuity of worship. I'll give you, if I may take 1 minute, an example from Rameshwaram. I don't know if you have visited Rameshwaram. I have visited. And you will today, you know these 22 tirthas. Today you are taken first to Agni Tirtha. Agni Tirtha today is just outside of the main temple. It's a creek of the sea. But this is not the original Agni Tirtha. The original Agni Tirtha is at Dhanushpur. But in 1964, the cyclone destroyed the railway line which conveyed pilgrims to Dhanushpuri at the eastern tip of the island. And therefore the pilgrims could no longer go for their holy dip at the Agni Tirtha. So what do? No issues. They relocated Agni Tirtha. They said, well, this is the Agni Tirtha. Let the worship continue. And today, if you talk to young priests, they will probably tell you that this has always been Agni Tirtha. So the geographical precision is not so important, but the memory, the worship should be uninterrupted. This is what matters. So therefore, you find 2 Sarasvati rivers in Gujarat. One joins at the Prabhaspattam, very close to Somnath. There is a Triveni Sangam there. And another joint from the Aravalli hills flows into the little river of Kutch. It's a seasonal river. The Luni river of Rajasthan, which passes through Pushkar, is also called Sarasvati. It is there on some maps. Then there are 2 small Sarasvatis in Haryana. So totally 5. Another 2 in UP, one of which flows, very brief river flows near Badrinath. So I think altogether there are at least 1 dozen Sarasvatis all over India. But they are all the kind of daughters, if you like, of the original Vedic river. And then there is one invisible Sarasvati at Prayag or Allahabad. As you know, Ganga Yamuna Sarasvati, the Triveni Sangam. Actually, there is no river there, and those who say that there was an underground river, that there is an underground river flowing there, are just maintaining the legend in the popular mind. There is no such underground river. There are only 2 rivers, but probably the late Harappans were migrating eastward and entering the Gangetic Valley, decided that it would be a good place to relocate the river and let it be there invisible. It doesn't matter much if the river is visible or not, but it is there, that is what matters. So, in summary, we find that Sarasvati is a powerful symbol of the flow of Indian civilization, which, despite interruptions, breaks, even disappearances, manages to find a new location, a new phase, a new rebirth of the culture. And this is what fascinates me in the story of this film. Thank you very much.
If you have questions, please send it to us.
Are you aware of Balakrishnan's work on the similarity of the place names all across the country? And do you have anything to say about that?
Balakrishnna, I'm not very sure, but there are quite a few studies of what is called typhoning, that is place names, yes. But how is this something to? Oh yes, that is true. But for example, the classic case is Madurai, which is a replication of Mathura. And Kanchi is based on Kashi and so on and so forth. So yes, the place names are migrated a lot, and that is one way to keep the memories alive also.
Balakrishnan's work suggests that even minor towns in Tamil Nadu have similarities to place names in northwest Pakistan.
I have read some papers like this. If you can send me the examples.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
You talked about the fire altars and fire worship in the Harappan region. Was there any idolatry or idol worship or something, or it was just a fire worship only? Any evidence of idol worship?
Well, first of all, I don't very much like the term idol worship, but okay, I get your point. Yes, they used images. For example, this mother goddess which I showed you is an image that was worshipped because the two items were traces of soot have been found at the bottom of some of these cups. Then you saw this, I was going to say shivling, let us just call it a linga-like object, which was also certainly worshipped. So it is not limited to just one type of worship. I have not said that it is only fire worship. There were many types of worship, as I said: nature worship, mother goddess worship, ritual bathing, fire worship, linga worship, and some more also. So it was quite a diverse religion, you might say, which is why it was martial, parallelistic with today's Hinduism, because there are so many types of worships that are accepted.
I have two questions. One, the major controversy that involves the Aryan Invasion Theory is the theory of the horse and the absence of the horse in any industry. There's a very long debate about horses. I'd like to make a comment on it. Second is, we talked about astronomy. One of the standard conventions in Indian astronomical traditions, right from Aryabhatta, is the use of the end of the Mahabharata war as is the use of the end of the Mahabharata war to take the start of the Kali Yuga, and the astronomical dating they use is 3100 BC. By these calculations that you are talking, that would happen actually much later, because you're representing Balarama's script was sometime in the 19th millennium BC, the 19th century, is that right?
I would say earlier.
But not this early.
It is a historical event. It have taken place before 1900 BC, when there were already some breaks in the Sarasvati, but it was not so depleted as we see it after 1900 BC. No. These are very big topics. I can only give you a summary of my opinion. First of all, horse bones have been identified by competent archaeologists, that is to say those who study the ancient bones, and not one or two but 12 elephant sites. 12. And I wrote a whole paper called The Horse and the Aryan Invasion, which you can download from the net to locate it easily, where I gave all the precise references of these 12 elephant sites, including Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and Kalibangan, Lothal, Surkutala, and several more in Gujarat. Some of them were also accepted by Western experts. So first of all, it is not true to say that there are no horses in the Indian civilization, but it is true that the horse is never represented. As far as we know today, there are no representations, depictions of the horse in Harappan art. So therefore, it was not a very culturally important animal. Okay? For the Harappans, this is undeniable. But my major objection to the horse characterization of the representation of Vedic culture is that if you read the Rig Veda independently, the main animal is not the horse at all, it is the bull. It is the bull to whom all gods are compared. When you praise Indra or Agni or Surya as mighty god, you compare him to a bull, never to a horse. Number one. Number two, in the Rig Veda, horse is one, it is Ashwa. But Ashwa need not always be a physical animal. This was pointed out by quite a lot of scholars, including Sri Aurobindo. When he read the Rig Veda,
in 1914 in Sanskrit, and this was before the Harappan civilization, so there was no controversy. He said Ashwa obviously in many passages is not referring to the physical element at all. It means speed, it means aggression, it means power. So we have to go back and decide whether we are still hypnotized, by readings by European scholars or not. In fact, I'll give you just one example, which is always brushed under the carpet. So those of you who are very developed and be familiar with the dialogue between Sarama and the Panins.